Hi again then guys, and welcome to episode 30 of Import Nights, the review series for the JDM import cars from, of course, Japan on GranTurismo, and this particular vehicle is a slightly older JDM car, and also a slightly older model of the Nissan Skyline. This is a car which is kind of a cult classic. It has a very small, dedicated fan base compared to the much broader, more obvious appeal of the more later Skylines, like the R32s, 3s, 4s. But this particular vehicle, though definitely different to later Skylines in a few ways, still has certain hallmarks of the Skyline that it really makes use of. Now, I personally really like this car. I love the way the R31 Skyline looks. It's notably not a GTR for a start, it's a GTS-R, and the rear-wheel drive factor in particular on this car, as opposed to the all-wheel drive of most notable Skylines after this, make a big difference. It obviously helps with regard to weight. It is lighter than many of the newer Skylines, at only 1,097 kilos, but it also means that the handling signature and the way it delivers its performance is notably different to something like an R32, R33 and of course R34. Now, the rear-wheel drive factor, I would say, doesn't necessarily improve the car, but it certainly doesn't make it worse. I would say it makes it different. This isn't to be viewed as better or worse than any of the other Skylines, it's to be viewed as different. To compare the R31 Skyline of this particular model to any of the other Skylines on the game just doesn't really work, because it's so different to pretty much all of them, the only exceptions really being the R30 shape machines, which are fairly similar. But overall, for those who haven't bought this car, what can you expect? Because there are, it's safe to say, still quite a few people who probably haven't noticed this car in the dealership. Maybe you just haven't bought it because you go for the more obvious choice of a newer Skyline. And that's not really surprising, that is the obvious thing to do. Maybe you saw the fact that it wasn't all-wheel drive, it doesn't have quite as much power to begin with, and saw that as a sign that, well, maybe it's not as good. Now, purely from a straight-line speed point of view, no, it's not as quick as the newer Skylines. It's not as quick off the line, and due to the fact that it does have notably less power than the vast majority of Skylines to come after it, does mean that the straight line performance is slower. This car has 542 horsepower from a 2-litre turbo engine, so it's also a lot smaller in capacity than the GTRs that would come after it, but the fact that it is also so much lighter than many of the other GTRs, maybe 100 to 200 kilos lighter than some of them, means that the handling signature, as well as obviously the rear-wheel drive in combination with that low weight, is notably different. Now, if you haven't driven this car, which is safe to say many people haven't on GranTurismo, it's nothing like any of the newer Skylines. It doesn't handle anything like those cars at all. This car feels mechanical, whereas the newer Skylines, to me at least, feel electrical. They feel very much like products of advanced automotive technology, which is what they are. They are basically the ultimate street level, not necessarily mass production, but high level production performance car. The amount of tech that's put into them means that they are essentially the everyman's Veyron. Now, I know some people will disagree with that sentiment, but what I mean by that is that Nissan put a huge amount of development and tech into every generation of Skyline GTR, especially the ones that come after this, because they become more and more computerized. This version, which is of course just before that revolution within the Skyline range, is a much more, say, back to basics type vehicle. It feels more like a Ferrari F40, for instance, in comparison to something more technically advanced such as an Enzo. That's the kind of difference that you can feel. The F40 isn't necessarily quicker than the Enzo, it's just different. Likewise with this Skyline. Now, I would say there are certain things which are better about this Skyline than the newer ones. Obviously in a straight line it's not really going to worry any of them, but that being said, if you put those Skylines down to the same kind of power level as this car, they wouldn't necessarily have an easy time outrunning it. Because for its power, this car is fast, very fast. Now the price tag on this model is also much, much lower than the Skylines to come after it, especially the GTRs. This is a 34,000 credit car. That's roughly 20 grand less than an R32 or an R33, and even cheaper again than an R34. So, the question is, of course, should you buy one? And if so, what kind of use could you put it to? Well, the fact that it's rear-wheel drive means that I would say it makes a better PP-restricted vehicle. It has less power to work with, it's rear-wheel drive instead of all-wheel drive, and all of those things added together, along with the way it handles, the way it delivers its performance from that 542 horsepower, mean that it makes a very good restricted, as I said, racer. Say for instance, you can't get up to 600 pp, or you have to be restricted to say 500, maybe a little bit more. This car can go up to 541. That's the kind of circumstance where this car could come in really handy. Now the car puts out almost 500 horsepower per tonne, which again, for a vehicle of its price and power, is impressive. The straight line performance for its power and for its price is impressive. The handling is actually much more similar to something like a Silvia or another S chassis vehicle than it is to other later GTRs. As far as Skylines go, as I mentioned earlier, this is really like no other model in the range. You have to drive it to really appreciate just how good this car can be. Now, being a rear-wheel drive model, the obvious choice or the obvious route to go down is drifting. And although yes, it can drift, so can the all-wheel drive Skyline, so I wouldn't necessarily say that this is better at drifting, but it certainly is very good at it. I would say that the best point about this car is its track potential. It has excellent handling, a huge amount of grip, it's very easy to drive, very enjoyable to work with, and has fantastic value for the money. So I definitely recommend checking this car out, and that's it overall for this pick overall, so I'll see you guys next time, and as always, thanks for watching.